What was the most gut-wrenching thing your parents did to you? My parents were workaholics who had a knack for neglecting their unwanted child, me. They had started a business together, and that business was their life. My birthdays were often spent without my parents, as they would just give me some money and tell me to go out and buy whatever I wanted. But what would a 10-year-old child want to buy except his parents' attention? That wasn't even the worst part. When I turned 18, I asked my parents if I could work part-time for them at their business. They flat out said they didn't want me there, and then walked away from the conversation. Soon after that, they told me to move out, and even handed me an official eviction notice. I had to get help from a friend's dad who owned a truck. I ended up renting a cramped apartment that had bed bugs in it, and then found a job at the local convenience store. But the manager was a control freak and fired me after a few months. I couldn't find a steady job after that, so I ended up going homeless, which was the lowest point of my life. I tried begging my parents for help, but they couldn't care less and blocked me. Thankfully, one of my friends found out I was living out of a tent and offered to take me in for a little while so I wouldn't freeze. She suggested I contact other members of my family. I was able to call my grandparents from my father's side of the family, and they were very surprised to hear from me. They were furious after learning about the situation and basically adopted me, flying me over to live with them in another state. They even cut my parents off from their will. Anyway, thanks to my lovely grandparents, I was able to go to community college. I graduated with a good degree, and eventually, my grandparents gave me their house. My grandma wanted to live in a warmer climate as the cold winter was getting harder and harder on her health every year. I was sad to see them go, but I happily bought the house since they sold it to me for 1/3 of its value. However, one day in late 2020, I came home after being away for over 2 weeks and saw a white van parked in my driveway. I felt dread inside me after realizing the van had the logo for my parents' business on the side of it. They had broken into my house and were living in the guest room. I told them to get the hell out. Grandma and Grandpa had sold it to me when they retired, so the house belonged to me. They'd have known that if they were in any way involved in my life, but they threw me to the wolves 10 years ago and had no remorse whatsoever. My father told me it was his parents' house first, and that meant he and my mother had the right to live there if they wanted. I just walked right into my bedroom and called the police. But surprise, surprise, the cops weren't any help. My parents made up a lie about how they had squatters' rights, and it worked because I didn't have any cameras. My mother even pulled out the waterworks, which was honestly kind of impressive. I ended up having to take them to court. Meanwhile, my parents were squatting in my house and rubbing it in my face. Apparently, their business went bankrupt, and they sold off almost everything to pay their debts. So they were really happy to live in my house rent-free forever. They were still working odd jobs, but refused to give me rent. They basically just handed me a $100 bill every month and said I should be grateful they were paying me anything at all. They said I already took away 18 years of their life and should be thankful they aren't demanding any money back. I was so at my wit's end, but I couldn't do anything that wouldn't make me end up in trouble with the law. I decided that it wasn't worth ruining my life over these two entitled jerks, and just decided to wait for the legal eviction notice. Finally, in early 2021, I managed to take my parents to court over their squatting. They tried to berate me and called me a useless son in court, as well as tried to use their $100 monthly payments as some kind of leverage. But the judge wasn't dumb and ended up laughing in their face. In the end, they were ordered to leave my house within 30 days. They confronted me and said they were disappointed in me for kicking out my own flesh and blood later that evening. I couldn't help but laugh. I called them hypocrites because that's exactly what they did to me when I was 18, without a care in the world for my well-being. They had no love for me, so I have no love for them. They had no right to call themselves my parents because they've never really acted like it. I called them a pair of snobby, lying, and now broke narcissists to their faces, then told them to get their affairs in order. They knew I wouldn't hesitate to call the police if they didn't leave my house when the 30 days were over. That final month was spent with them guilt-tripping me, trying to make me change my mind. But I had been through enough to fall for their lies. What's even funnier is that they had been so convinced they could make me let them stay that they didn't bother to look for an apartment until after the court eviction went through. They had to get a tiny and cramped studio apartment in the next city over because it was the only thing they could find on such short notice. It was a lot like what I had to do when I was 18, which is quite ironic. The walls looked baby barf green, and the carpet had to be over 20 years old. My mother went out of her way to give me sad eyes the whole time they were packing their stuff. They also ended up demanding the queen-size bed, dresser, and flat-screen TV from my guest room. I told them to just take the damn things because I no longer wanted them in the house after they spent 5 months using that stuff. As they left, they watched me change the locks on the front door and realized they couldn't come back here again. I breathed a massive sigh of relief the second that van went down the road.